Now, I'd like for all of you to make yourselves very comfortable in your seat. Wiggle yourself around. Just get yourself in a very, very comfortable position, because I want to ask you to not move at all for a moment. Get yourself in a position where you're not going to get antsy and feel like for 60 seconds or maybe even 2 minutes that you do not have to move, okay? Are you comfortable? Now then, do your best to remain absolutely still, relax, do not move. Now you're moving. You're moving. Close your eyes for a moment, all of you. Just close your eyes now and concentrate. Everyone in here is moving at 860 miles per hour at this moment. Can you visualize that? You realize that where you sit, in your chair, you're actually moving straight forward, because if you take a look now, you can open your eyes. This earth of ours, rotating on its axis, everybody in here is moving this direction at exactly 860 miles per hour. Now, you children should be careful about jumping up and down. Because, you know, if you're jumping up and the earth keeps on moving at 860 miles an hour, who knows where you may come down. I'll leave it to your parents to explain to you why that's not dangerous to you, but it is something to think about. How fast is that? Is that very fast, 860 miles an hour? Is that really moving on? Is that really getting it up, you know, and picking them up and putting them down, moving on down the road? It's something well over the speed of sound. I don't know just to be what, it's not quite 150% of the speed of sound, but it's well over the speed of sound. That's getting it on, isn't it? Well, not exactly, because you see, we are also moving at 66,661, not 62, not 60, 61, miles per hour around the sun. So the earth itself, as it makes its way around the sun, is moving, and we're on it, and we're moving right along with it, at 66,000 miles per hour. Now, is that fast? It's pretty fast. However, when you think about it, how long does it take us at 66,000 miles an hour to make it all the way around? It takes a whole year. I mean, that harkens back to the old sailing days when a ship would leave England, you know, and be gone 18 months to make a trip to the South Seas and finally get back, or longer. Go to Australia and come back. Take 2 years sometimes. You start thinking about that, well, wait a minute. Is 66,000 miles an hour that fast? Why does it take so long? Well, the answer is that the journey around the sun is something close to 1/2 billion miles. 583,600 to be exact, you know, plus or minus a mile. That's a long way. And so consequently, even when you're moving along at a good clip, like 66,000 miles per hour, it doesn't seem so fast when you're looking at that kind of distance. Now, light moves a lot faster than that. We know that light moves at 186,000 miles per second. If you happen to have a pulse rate of 60, that means every beat of your heart, light has traveled 160,000 miles. That works out to be something in the neighborhood of 670 million miles per hour. Now, I would say that is fast. By comparison, the distance covered in 1 year at 66,000 miles per hour, that's the speed of the earth around the sun, that distance is covered by light in 52 minutes. Now, that's fast. That's picking them up and laying them down. In fact, there is nothing in the universe that is faster than that. There is, it seems, a speed limit in the universe, and that speed limit is 186,000 miles per second. That is the speed of a photon. What, in Sam Hill, one might ask, is a photon? Well, a photon is a minute energy packet of electromagnetic radiation. How do you know what a photon is? Tell you a lot, didn't I? Basically, all it is a tiny, so tiny that it's inexpressibly tiny, little bundle, not of matter, but of energy. And all photons travel at 186,000 miles per hour, and they do not exist at rest. If they come to a complete stop, they have no mass, they have no weight, there is nothing to a photon once it stops. They're either going, they got two speeds, 186,000 miles an hour, or they don't exist. They also of course, carry varying degrees of energy with them. And that difference of energy between them is what makes the difference in the color of light. Because all a photon is just a little particle of energy which, in a certain spectrum, we see as light. Simple. But the light travels from your face to my eye at 186,000 miles per second. And for all practical purposes, in a room like this, the transmission of light is instantaneous. We are not aware of any change or any time lapse involved in the whole process, are we at all? It's not significant. You ever stop to think about, here are all these photons of light arriving here from the sun, and they shower light all over the landscape. And maybe at night, though, when none of them are coming, we can be in this room and have all the lights on. All these lights are just putting out photons of light. They're just filling the room with it constantly. Now, let's pick a real dark night and no lights anywhere around, and then all of a sudden we switch off the light in this room. What happens to all those photons that were ricocheting around this room until we turn the light off? Well, they're absorbed by the carpet, and they're absorbed by the walls and the things around here, and even our own bodies and our own eyes. They're all just absorbed. Well, how come we don't sort of see them while they decay? Because every one of them is traveling at 186,000 miles per second. And all of that absorption takes place in a period of time shorter than even nanoseconds, which is one of the periods of time measured by computers. It's even faster than that because of the speeds that are involved in the transmission of light. So consequently, when you begin to look at these speeds of things going on here, that the Earth around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, it's really not so fast at all compared to the speed of light. So here we are, sitting on this Earth, moving at 66,000 miles per hour. Well, no, not exactly. Because you see, our Earth is going around the sun, and the sun is not sitting still. The sun itself is moving as a part of a galaxy of stars. It actually moves in a circular fashion around a center of stars, a globular cluster right down toward the center of this group, looking like nothing so much as a giant whirlpool in the sky, if you could really see it. Our sun is about two-thirds of the way out that galaxy, and it's making its way around that. It makes its way around the center of this galaxy at a speed something in the vicinity of 700,000 miles per hour. Now we're getting on up there in speed, aren't we? Now we're picking them up and laying them down. Now we are really getting on with it. 700,000 miles per hour. Now, how long do you suppose it takes our sun to go from where it is today completely around that galaxy and come back to where it is again today? How many of you think it would take a year or less? Nobody buys that. They want a couple of buys. How many of you think it would take 10 years or less? Less than 10 years. Anybody buy that one? How many of you think it would take 20 years or less? How many people want to buy any of this? Are you careful, or you just say, well, I don't know, who cares? Okay, I'm going to give up and tell you. It will take our sun, traveling at 700,000 miles per hour, 188 million years to make its way completely around the galaxy to where we are today. 188 million years at 700,000 miles per hour. Now that is fast. And yet, when you look at it and when you really consider how far you would get, it isn't that fast. Because whenever you look at the distances, the ratio of the speed of travel of physical bodies becomes really relatively minor by comparison. And so that any kind of movement in interstellar space takes agonizingly long periods of time, 188 million years, just to make the loop in the galaxy. Now that all by itself should tell you something about the age of the galaxy, how old it is, and perhaps how old it's going to be. And then when you look at it, And you realize that that 700,000 miles per hour that the Earth, that the Sun is making its way around that galaxy, is something just barely better than 1/1000th of the speed of light. Then you realize that 700,000 miles an hour, relatively speaking, isn't very fast at all. But the real shocker comes when you have settled down and you have come to understand the speed of light. You understand that light moves 186,000 miles per second. It really is, for all intents and purposes, as far as you and I are concerned, instantaneous. When you suddenly realize the size of the universe, even the speed of light seems to be slow for the distances involved. For example, a photon from the center of our galaxy would take 30,000 years to reach your telescope. Now that's mind-boggling. You might find yourself somewhere along the line in this sermon. I'm sure you will, in fact. Your mind will just slip through 2 or 3 cogs as we go through some of these things, because they are really a little bit beyond what you and I are prepared to grapple with. But you and I could go out on a dark night. We could train our television, our telescope toward the center of our galaxy, and then try to get yourself to understand in your head, in your mind, that what you see in your telescope was happening 30,000 years ago, and see if you can grapple with that. That's our galaxy. That's the kind of size that we're talking about. This light moving at these incredible speeds will take 30,000, not days, but years to reach us from the center of our galaxy. And then you begin to try to comprehend what this all means in terms of other things. For example, our galaxy is a part of a cluster of galaxies. It's mind-boggling in itself to realize that our galaxy has something well in excess of 1 billion stars. And it's only one of about 20 of a local, what astronomers call the local group, if you can call distances like this local. There are 20 galaxies in our local group. The Andromeda galaxy, a neighboring galaxy, and you can walk out on a clear night. If you've got a fairly good little telescope, you can spot that and take a look at the Andromeda galaxy. That galaxy is something in excess of 2 million light years away. And they say you can't look into the past. Yes, you can. If you can look at the Andromeda galaxy, you will see it as it was over 2 million years ago. Good grief. It does make you wonder how anyone would ever decide that the heavens were only 6,000 years old, doesn't it? Whenever the evidence for this is so plain. Now, our group of galaxies is part of what astronomers call a supercluster. Now, it's not enough to consider you've got 1 billion stars in a single galaxy that's only part of a cluster of galaxies. But then you realize that our cluster of galaxies is a part of a supercluster, and superclusters can number something in the vicinity of 100 clusters, and a cluster could have 20 galaxies. Do you realize what you're talking about in terms of numbers and distances in this thing? A supercluster, our supercluster, is something like about 150 million light years in diameter. 150 million light years. These numbers, you know, your brain does tend to start slipping its clutch a little bit as you grapple with them and try to cope with them. And I tried to start small and work our way up to see if we can grapple in any way, in any form, with the size of this universe. In this supercluster that you and I are in, Virgo, which is the nearest large cluster to us, is 50 million light years away. And so we train our telescopes on Virgo. And what do we see? We see it as it was 50 million years ago. And you sit there and you wonder, well, has it burned out since then? You know, is it still there? Well, the answer is no, it is not still in the same position it was. It has moved considerably. As of this moment, as we speak, as we stand here today, Virgo is not where it appeared to be last night in your telescopes. It has moved considerably. In fact, it has probably moved at a speed something in the vicinity of 1 million miles per hour away from wherever the center of the universe is in that period of time. Shocker. 1 million miles every hour means that in the last, 50 million years, it has managed to move itself considerably from that location. And, of course, some of its stars have long since gone supernova, have burned themselves out, are no longer visible to us here. if we were able to see them individually. It's really a staggering thing to try to understand what it all means. The furthest objects in the universe, quasars, are something over 15 billion light years away. Now, we had trouble with 50 million or 150 million. Now we're up to 15 billion. These are the furthest objects that radio telescopes and others have been able to detect in our universe. The curious thing about it is that no matter what direction we look, we find these most distant objects very similar in all directions, and the whole thing is the same. It seems the same sort of distribution in every direction we look. And they say that the universe is isotropic, which means it's the same no matter where you look at it from. That if you were halfway across the universe and you took your telescope and you looked around it, it would look very much like it does to you here where you are today. And that in itself is hard to grapple with. What we detect in radio telescopes today started its journey 15 billion years ago and has traveled constantly at 186,000 miles per second and has only now arrived for us to consider it, for us to study it, to analyze it, to grapple with it, to somehow try to understand. We can only observe these things as they were 15 billion years ago, and we have no idea what they are today. On a clear night, you can walk outside. How many stars do you suppose you can see? I mean, a good one. Cast your back in your imagination to some night when you were out in an area where you farm somewhere, no lights around, it's really, really good and dark. And you sat back in a chair and you lifted your eyes to the heavens and you looked up and here's the Milky Way winding its way across the sky and here are stars and stars and stars, everywhere stars. And you know that the Bible speaks of the stars being innumerable in multitude and how it talks in terms of them being like the sand of the seashore. You know what's curious about that statement in the Bible is that the fact of the matter is that the stars really are numberable that you can see. Actually, they can sit down and count them. You can lay out the sky in grids, and you can get a group of people together, and you can start counting, and you can put it together. Funny thing is that really there are only some 2,000 stars, what appear to be stars, or star-like objects, in the sky on a given night as you go out. In the course of a year, with the Earth moving around the sun, you may be able to put together, if you're careful, some 6,000 different stars that are observable, or stellar phenomena. Now, some of them are actually double stars, that is, two stars revolving around one another, and you cannot distinguish them with the naked eye. Others are actually galaxies that you see and you think they are stars. Others are star clusters, and this various stellar objects is what they're talking about when they say 2,000. Now, imagine if you can again that most starlit night that you've ever seen. More stars than you've ever seen in all your life. Brilliant, beautiful night, no moon, coal black and dark. Now, can you in your imagination double the number of stars that you're looking at? Now triple them. Now multiply that figure by 10. Where along the way do you get to the place to where you have really left no part of the sky uncovered by stars? It begins to get rather crowded when you start thinking about it, doesn't it? We've only gone to, say, 30 times your initial estimate when we tripled and then multiplied by 10. How many stars are there? In our galaxy alone, there are 500 million more stars. 500 million times as many stars as you are able to see on the clearest night. Now, we're not just doubling and tripling or multiplying it by 10. We multiply it by 500 billion. Why, if all those stars were close enough to be seen, you could, how much light would you have at night? The sky would be light from wall to wall, would it not? And that is the stars from our galaxy alone. And there are 20 galaxies in our cluster. And there are probably 100 galaxies in our supercluster. 100 clusters in our supercluster. They say that there are probably 1 billion galaxies in the universe. How in the world do they know that? Well, they know it because of various work that they've done with radio telescopes. They quantify the energy coming from various quarters. They square off an area of the sky. They search it carefully. They analyze what comes in over here. They're able then to determine from the radio signals coming in the magnitude of mass that's out there and the activity that's there and determine how many galaxies there are in that square. And they do another square over here, and the proportion is about the same. And they do another one until statistically they've got it all worked out. They just multiply the thing down. And they say something like 1 billion galaxies. And they average something like 1 billion stars apiece. Whew. You know, when you begin to put all that together, that is staggering. Absolutely staggering. There's now clear agreement, I think, among astrophysicists and astronomers both, that nothing of our observable universe existed 20 billion years ago. I mean, there is nothing in the sky that you can look at with the most powerful telescopes or even radio telescopes that existed more than 20 billion years ago. Not even background radiation. Now, that is interesting. It tells you that everything that there is, all that we observe, all of the things that we can see, all these billions times billions of stars, came into existence less than 20 billion years ago. Now, that's an astronomical period of time. It's a mind-boggling period of time, but it is finite. It is real. And it means there was a definite time and point of beginning, and that the universe since that time has been expanding and has not stopped expanding until this day. As far as we know, you have to keep in mind we can't see the most distant ones, but there is no reason to suppose, from anything that we can see, that expansion has stopped. In fact, the majority, I think, of scientists nowadays believe it will never stop. That there will never be a time when all of the general mass of the universe slows all this down and by gravitation begins to pull it all back together, that will not happen. That there is insufficient mass in the universe to prevent the escape of all galaxies from one another eventually. And that is indeed mind-boggling. It is, of course, what all of us have heard about, the Big Bang theory, that there was a Big Bang some 20 million years ago, called by one the primordial fireball, which has a certain bit more dignity than Big Bang does. At point zero, there was nothing, it seems, except light. Just an incredible primordial fireball that began at that moment of time. How it began, no one even is willing to attempt to suggest. They cannot find any evidence of what there was before, so no one even bothers to speculate that. They have occupied themselves sufficiently with being able to determine with a fair degree of accuracy, surprising degree of accuracy, that this did happen. 10 seconds later, nearly all of the energy is in the form of photons. Nearly all of the matter is in the form of hydrogen. Has expanded itself into a fireball some 33,600,000 miles in diameter in 10 seconds. 100 seconds from point zero, the fireball is 36 million miles across. Helium has begun to form in addition to hydrogen. Nuclear reactions begin to die out in about 100 seconds from that point zero. All this is, they've worked this out very carefully by theory and by different models of the universe, and it's probably not that far out of line of what actually did take place. It took about 1,000 years for the changeover to take place from a radiation-dominated universe to a matter-dominated universe, and strangely 100 million years from point zero, the first galaxy formation began. 100 million years. Which means that those galaxies were something like 100 million years, light years, from the center of the universe as all that stuff begins to scream at 186,000 miles per second away from the center of the universe. Is your God big enough for all this? Is your God big enough to step out into space where there's nothing but darkness as far as the eye can see and say, let there be light? And create a gigantic fireball 36 million miles apart of pure light and energy and heat and fire? Your God that big? The one that you worship, the one that you get up and pray to every morning, the one whose word you study in the Bible, is he big enough to say the word and create that primordial fireball of nothing but pure light and energy and hydrogen 36 million miles across within 100 seconds of the time he said the word? Is your God big enough to condense energy and hydrogen into stars and galaxies and to begin to transform hydrogen and helium through the nuclear process into iron, selenium, oxygen, copper, all of the different elements that you and I now know? Is your God big enough to make all that take place, to create it, bring it about? Is your God big enough to call the roll of stars and mention every one of them by name? 1 billion times 1 billion. How big a computer would you need to record the names of 1 billion stars? And yet the mind of God calls them, we're told, all by name. Where would you even find that many names, much less the time to name them, the time to call them off, the time to speak them, the time to give attention? But of course, when you understand that 20 billion years is not that long compared with eternity, maybe that would help to understand some of the time element involved. You know, with all these things in mind, I think we ought to take a look at some scriptures again that are old, familiar scriptures to us, maybe some of them not so familiar, and review in our minds this God of ours and just how great this God is and just what in the world is He doing with this universe. Because here we are, just like a fly speck off in one corner of this thing. Little ants crawling around on a globe who are of absolutely no significance in a universe that's 40 billion light years from one end of it to the other. And that may not be all that there is of the universe. That's all we have been able to discern. And that may not be the only universe. There could be 2 or 3 or 100 or 1 billion universes, for all we know. And here we sit, trying to think in terms, or trying to fathom, or understand, or believe in, or grasp, or grapple with God. Job had to fight the battle of understanding about God. Knew a little bit. But in a time of adversity, when things were going bad for him, his perspective didn't always waver. His friends had given him quite a little bit of a bad time. In Job, the 26th chapter, he says, Job answered and said, how have you helped him that is without power? You aren't helping me a bit by the things that you would say. How are you counseling him that has no wisdom? How have you plentifully declared the thing as it is? To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit came from you? Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him. Destruction has no covering. He stretches out the north over the empty places, and he hangs the earth upon nothing. That is a profoundly modern idea. Profoundly. Galileo was sent into permanent exile by the Roman Catholic Church and had to live alone for years because he postulated that God had hung the earth really upon nothing, and the earth could rotate around the sun the way that it did. The ancients believed that everything was up there suspended, and the earth was the only solid thing that there was. And yet Job knew that the earth was hung in space, that God had hung the earth upon nothing. He said, he binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud does not rent under them. He holds back the face of his throne and spreads the cloud under it. He has compassed the water with bounds until the day and night come to an end. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his reproof. He divides the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smites through the proud. By his Spirit he has garnished the heavens. It's interesting. I sat in a restaurant and see on the menu this little thing says entrecote steak garni, which means a little flank steak that they garnished. And by garnish, they mean they sort of surround it with some peas and carrots and a little parsley and so forth. And here the translators of the Bible use the word garnish, like you would garnish a plate, or like you would garnish a wall with decorations, or like you would wander around your house hanging up lights at Christmas time. And they say he has garnished the heavens, decorated it with strings of light. He puts the stars out there just like you and I would hang up little strings of lights here and there in times of celebration, or put little decorations and garnish the room, and hang things on the wall and put up flowers for a wedding. All those little things that we do, God, he said, garnishes the heavens, much in the way that we would do that.
This is the end of side 1. Please fast forward and flip tape over to side 2.
Hand has formed the crooked serpent. Now, that's not talking about the devil or Satan being a serpent. It's an ancient reference, probably the oldest reference to Draco, the serpent, which is the constellation that sits about in between the Big Bear and the Little Bear, the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper in the northern heavens. If you find the Big Dipper, look to the North Star, Polaris, and then right in between you'll see, if you look carefully, a little twining of stars It winds up to a little four-starred head, which is by the ancients referred to as the serpent, otherwise known as Draco, one of the constellations well known to people who study the heavens. And that's a reference. He said his hand formed the crooked serpent. He actually put them in position for us to view, moved them around. It's an interesting simile that he drew. And what he is saying is that God has placed these things where they are. Now, perhaps Job may not have fully understood that in about 25,000 years or so, if we're all still here, those stars will not be in quite the same positions that they are today. For example, the Big Dipper in about 25,000 years will no longer be recognizable as such because all the stars in the Big Dipper are moving in different directions relatively from our point of view and would look quite different in that period of time because the heavens do move. But for all the time of man, the heavens have basically been the same. And that's the reference that he is making here. Turn back to Job 37, where God has begun to speak to Job. In chapter 37, he said, "This also, and my heart has trembled and is moved out of his place. Hear attentively the noise of his voice and the sound that goes forth out of his mouth." Later he will say in verse 17, "How your garments are warm when he quiets the earth by a south wind. Have you with him spread out the sky, which is strong and as a molten looking glass, like this beautiful heavens that are above us?" Chapter 38, passing down to verse 31. He says, "Can you bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion?" What's he talking about here? He started out in the chapter by saying, "The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, 'Who is this that darkens counsel without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I'm going to demand of you, and I want you to answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?'" And this is the theme that God will continue to develop with Job all through this chapter. And he puts him in his place by saying, "All right, I'm going to, you've gone on, you've talked, and you've spelled out all these words before all these people. And you've talked as though you were a great wise man. I have a question for you. Where were you when I did these things? Do you have the power to bind that great serpent yourself?" The answer, of course, is no. And he said, "Can you," verse 31, "bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion?" What does it mean? Well, you go up in the night sky, and you'll find those three stars across, which form what is generally called the belt of Orion. And you've got this Orion the Hunter, who is one of the constellations in the sky. And he says, "I want to know this. Can you walk out there tonight, and can you loose those things which hold Orion in place? Those stars that are there, and they were there last year, and they were there the year before. And even though they are moving at such incredible speeds in your entire lifetime, and in fact in the entire history of the earth, they will always look the same. Can you move them around? Can you put them in place? Can you cut them loose?" The Pleiades is one. He said, "Can you bind it?" Orion is another. Can you loose it? Can you bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Can you guide Arcturus with his sons? Other references to constellations in the sky which show up in their seasons and are not seen at other times. Can you control when they're there and when they're not, he wants to know? Do you know the ordinances, the laws of the heavens? Can you set the dominion thereof in the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that the abundance of waters may cover you, and so on? Can you do these things? It's an astonishing thing to realize. He says, "Do you know the ordinances of the heavens?" And here we are, so many thousands of years later, because Job is probably the oldest book in the Bible. Probably written long before any other book in the Bible was ever written. It's the most ancient Hebrew. And here we are all these thousands of years later. And we know so much more than he knew. And yet we know so much little more, comparatively speaking, compared to what there is to be known. We know, we can say that the universe is some 20 billion light years across, which he might not have understood that, might not grasp it. We can come to grasp at some degree maybe the age of the earth, things that he did not know. And yet we still know so little of the ordinances of heaven. We still, in all that we see, in all that we have explained, in all of the things, and in 40 years of study, basically the Big Bang Theory, in 40 years of the analysis of this thing, there has no absurdity cropped up in it. And there should have been, if the theory is wrong. And yet with all that we understand, and we look out to the heavens, there are still things that are not there that ought to be there. There are still things that we don't see that we should be able to see. There are still suggestions or ideas or thoughts of things and of theories that cannot be weighed because we have no way of measuring. And we are still, like Job, God can look just right at us and say, do you know the ordinances of the heavens? And the most intelligent and the most learned and the wisest among us would have to say, no, Lord, we really don't even yet understand or begin to grasp the ordinances, that is, the laws of the heavens. As much as we have learned, as far as we have come, we still find ourselves absolutely helpless in the face of such distance, in the face of such power, and can only, by the power of the logic which God has placed in human minds, even grapple with it at all. In Psalm 19, in verse 1, David began being moved with what he saw in the night sky, said, the heavens declare the glory of God. The expanse shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech. Night after night shows knowledge. There is no speech, there is no language where the voice of the stars is not heard. Their line, that is their message, is gone out through all the earth, their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which like a bridegroom comes out of his chamber and rejoices like a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, his circuit to the ends thereof, and there is nothing that is hid from the heat of it. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is pure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. And so on he goes with the tremendous explanation not only of the physical law of God as it's witnessed in the heavens, but the moral law of God which is witnessed in the earth. What a beautiful concept that keeps being developed again and again. There's so many scriptures in the Bible that refer to things like this. Turn back to the 136th Psalm, if you would. Psalm 136. Verse 5. Beginning with verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. This is that unusual psalm where the repeated expression, his mercy endures forever, is found. Obviously, it was written to be sung, and probably was sung in counterpoint with these things working together. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods, his mercy endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, his mercy endures forever. To him who alone doeth great wonders, his mercy endures forever. To him who by wisdom made the heavens, his mercy endures forever. To him that stretched out the earth above the waters, his mercy endures forever. To him that made great lights, his mercy endures forever. The sun to rule by day, his mercy endures forever. The moon and the stars to rule by night, for his mercy endures forever. Through every generation, men looked to the skies and saw again and again the glory of God and the power of God as it was expounded. Turn over to Isaiah, one of the prophets who got rapturous really about the universe. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 22. Verse 21, have you not heard? Have you not known? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are like grasshoppers, that stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. It brings the princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth like vanity. All these references that crop up, I won't go on with them, but there are so many of them where the prophets and others make reference to the heavens, declaring the glory of God, and even to the obligation to all of us to proclaim his glory out of the heavens to all the earth. What is the fate of the universe? You know, you look around you and you see all this, and it has gone on for so long. What is the fate of it? Where is it going? What do informed and educated men believe is eventually going to take place? The one thing that is very evident to everyone is that entropy is everywhere. That means that whatever is here has been wound up and is running down and will continue to run down. All stars continue to grow colder, and they all have a definite lifespan as it cools. Its radius will eventually reach the present orbit of Mercury, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica article on this. Its radius will reach the present orbit of Mercury. The Earth's oceans and atmospheres will be long gone. before that time because of the heat. Most stars by this time will be very old and approaching the same sort of fate. The Milky Way will slowly become faint and dark. The galaxy, a graveyard of stars. Quote, man, if he has survived in a form beyond the wildest dreams of the 20th century, will have embarked on his last and perhaps greatest adventure. What an interesting statement. Now, lest any of you lose any sleep over this, as far as time is concerned, they expect the sun to have come to be this red giant somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 billion years from now. So, as I say, you don't need to go running out and try to make some kind of preparations for this, because it's not going to take place tomorrow, not by the normal evolutionary course of events. What we read of in the book of Revelation, however, is another matter entirely. 10 billion years in the future. But then, of course, eternity is a whole lot longer than that. There's one psalm that I skipped over. I'd like for you to turn back to it with me. The 8th Psalm. Psalm 8. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth, who has set your glory above the heavens. Can you think of anything that demonstrates the glory of God more than the physical universe that you and I can sit out here and study and look at and stare at on a dark night? How excellent, O Lord, is your name in all the earth, who has set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and sucklings you have ordained strength because of your enemies, that you might still the enemy and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, when I consider the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. How big is God when the moon and the stars are the work of his fingers? Oh, I know he's speaking metaphorically, but still to grapple with what David saw as the greatness, the power, the glory of God, so transcending. This one is able to form, to shape, to position, to move, if necessary. Stars, galaxies, worlds. What a staggering thing to realize what he has done. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? One of the things I wanted to do today is to kind of try to get a perspective on ourselves, to try to get a different look. When you start off thinking in terms of going 860 miles an hour toward the rising sun the next morning, that's impressive speed. Then when you think in terms of 66,000 miles an hour hurrying around through the four seasons to find your way back to summer again, that's awfully fast. Then when you think in terms of 700,000 miles per hour, you've moved even faster, and you get on up to the speed of light, and you're screaming along at the speed limit of the universe, and you still feel like you're stuck in the mud because of the size of everything. It does help one to realize that somewhere down in the corner of a galaxy, on a second-rate or third-rate star, or a planet rotating around that star, are a group of small, mortal, short lifespan, living to be 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 years old, who cannot even travel to the nearest star because it is too far for our lifespans to cope with. 4.5 years at the speed of light if we could do it. But you see, we can't do it. None of us can even live long enough to take a trip to the nearest star and back at the speed our Earth is going around the sun, or that our sun is going around our galaxy. Even at those speeds, we cannot do it. For you see, that speed, that fastest speed of our sun around the galaxy, that thing is only moving at 1/1000th of the speed of light. And it would take 4.5 years to go to that nearest double star at the speed of light. So at 700,000 miles an hour, what's that work out to be? But 4,000 years out and 4,000 years back. And it might as well be 40 million. For we would never ourselves be able to make it. Not with our little old limited lifespans that we have. It's a peculiar thing, as you look at this and you think about it. As all this takes place, are there other worlds and other people? Why not? Why not? You see, there's plenty of room in this universe of ours for all of us, isn't there? There's just loads and bags of room all over the place. And you see, we all live such short lifespans, and we are so far apart that there's no way any of us will ever bother any of the rest of us. We are, in fact, so far apart that in the entire span of recorded human history, if we all started in these universes about the same time, none of us would ever have time to get a radio signal to another galaxy and back, or another star, much less go there. And so God has ensured that we will never know. And we'll never visit. And we'll never interfere. We are all impressed with Star Trek, who get up in their little spaceship and Captain Kirk says, give me warp 7. You know what warp 7 means? 7 times the speed of light. Big deal. 7 times the speed of light. You're crippling along here. But when you're talking about 20 billion light years away, and you divide that by 7, how long is it going to take you to make it? When you talk about 30,000 light years away, you divide that by 7, how long is it going to take you to make it? Captain Kirk, Scotty, and the rest of them haven't gotten very far when you get right down to it in their own galaxy. Of course, it's fantasy, and it's fun. And maybe to some small degree it helps people to realize what a tremendous place it is. But I'm still waiting on the science fiction movie that presents the universe as it is. 2001, A Space Odyssey, might have gotten somewhere in the general vicinity of it, but there is much more that could be said, and much more could be done if people want to get involved in science fiction as opposed to fantasy, which is really a better description of what most science fiction turns out to be. What is man? When you look at all of this, that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man, that you visit him. Is he really that important? Turn back to Hebrews, where Paul quotes this scripture, and where we can see his interpretation, what he saw in it, what it meant to Paul himself. He says, beginning in chapter 2 of the book of Hebrews, "Therefore we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by them that heard him?" I mean, if we, with all of the fact that God has spoken in all these times past, he's spoken by prophets, and he's given them visions, and he's given them dreams, and here comes this bearded old man down on the mountains and says, 3.5 years, it's not going to rain. And that's the way God spoke to them. But in these last days, he sent his own Son to us. Now, how are we going to escape if we don't listen to his Son? He says in verse 5, "For unto the angels he has not put in subjection the world to come whereof we speak. But one in a certain place testified, saying, What is man, that you are mindful of him? What is the Son of Man, that you visit him? You have made him for a little while inferior to the angels. You crowned him with glory and with honor, and you did set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For that he put all in subjection, he left nothing that is not put under him. But now we see not yet all things put under him." How true it is. How true it is. The star Aldebaran has not been put under us yet. We can only sit on a dark night in our little telescope and look at it through the telescope and wonder about the distance and what is there. The star Altair is still far beyond our grasp with anything we can do except look and wonder and ponder. The Crab Nebulae, the Horsehead Nebulae, these things are things that we can look at and wonder and ponder, but they are not under our dominion yet. The furthermost quasars are there for us to study. Seems as though it's the glory of God to hide a matter and the glory of kings and men to search it out and try to find it. And he has left us all this to busy ourselves with, and in the process understand how great he is and how small and how petty we ourselves are. Everything's not under us yet, but it is intended that it be. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. For it became him for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory. Now that's staggering to think about, because God speaks of his own glory being above and beyond and greater than the glory of the heavens. And then he turns right around and talks about that one of the objects and one of the things he is doing with mortal human beings who crawl around like so many caterpillars upon the earth is to bring these sons to glory, to bring them to the kind of glory that he himself has, to the point that John would say that when we shall see him or be with him, we shall see him as he is, for we shall be like him, bringing many sons to glory. This is what Paul saw the importance of that psalm being, in looking up to the heavens and stagger, having your imagination stagger with what you see, and then say, with all of this, and realizing the power of God, and realizing what he has done and what he can do, why on earth does he concern himself with us? And the staggering truth comes home that all of this is about us and for us. The whole thing was done to prepare an environment for man and to create man in that environment, to give him life, to give him a chance himself to become like God. What is man? He is the object of the whole exercise. And that is staggering beyond belief. It is sad in a sense and sobering as well that we occupy ourselves with so many little things, so many tedious things, so many petty things, isn't it, when you think about it? And then you turn back and read a scripture like Isaiah 51 and wonder how hard it is for us to keep our perspective. Isaiah 51 and verse 1, listen to me, you that follow after righteousness. Listen to me, you that seek the Lord. Look at the rock from which you were cut. Look at the hole out of which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, to Sarah that bare you, for I called him alone and blessed him and increased him. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden. Just a bunch of Old Testament prophecy sounds like, just, same old stuff. Her desert will be like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Listen to me, my people. Give ear to me, my nation, for a law shall proceed from me. I will make my judgment to rest for a light of the people. My righteousness is near. My salvation is gone forth. My arm shall judge the people. The isles shall wait upon me, and my arm shall they trust. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look upon the earth beneath. The heavens, why, they shall vanish away like smoke. The earth shall wax old like a garment, and they that dwell therein shall die in like manner. But my salvation shall be forever, and my righteousness shall not be abolished. Interesting that the analysis that they gave of that galaxy slowly growing cold, he says that the heavens shall vanish away like smoke. Just like decaying and burning out, even God implies that the end of the universe must be. As we ourselves have finally figured out, the end of the universe must be. Listen to me, you that know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Don't fear the reproach of men. Don't be afraid of their revilings. For the moth will eat them up like a garment, the worm shall eat them like wool. My righteousness shall be forever and ever, my salvation from generation to generation. Awake, awake. Put on your strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as the Ancient of Days in the generations of old. Are you not the one that has cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Are you not the one which has dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that has made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over? The redeemed of the Lord shall return and come with singing to Zion. Everlasting joy shall be upon their head. They shall obtain gladness and joy. And sorrow and mourning shall flee away. I, even I, am he that comforts you. Who are you that you should be afraid of a man that shall die? You who are to inherit the heavens. You people who are to be placed over all that is in my hand and all that I have created and all that I have made. You who are to outlast the heavens. Why should you be afraid of a man that's going to die, and of the Son of Man who is made like grass, and to forget the Lord your Maker that has stretched forth the heavens, and has laid the foundations of the earth, and have feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor, as if he were ready to destroy? And now, where is the fury of the oppressor? The captive exile hastens that he may be loosed, that he should not die in the pit, that his bread should not fail. But I am the Lord your God that divided the sea, whose waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name. I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you in the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens. That is one of the most astonishing statements that I have ever read in the Bible. I cannot think of any ordinary explanation that reaches out to it or that touches it. That I may plant the heavens. This doesn't mean sowing stars up there, for that was done long ago. It doesn't mean ordering the heavenly farm of galaxies. That was done long ago. It is almost as though he is suggesting the possibility of peopling the heavens at some time in the future, covering them with his own sons, with people to be born of him, to be rulers over the furthest reaches of the universe, of the galaxies, of quasars, of black holes, of whatever else there is out there for us to understand and to know. Wouldn't we hate to miss out on the revelation that will come of the origin of the universe, of how it was built, of how it was developed, of where it went? And wouldn't it be a horrible shame if those of us who understand the glory of God should fail to proclaim the glory of God throughout the world, among all people, of all nations, of all tongues, and in all times? I'm reminded of an old song that we love to sing and love to hear. O Lord my God, when I, in awesome wonder, consider all the works your hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, your power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior, God, to thee. How great thou art! How great